Betty, thank you for taking some time out of your day to speak with us today. What do you think of the proposed new policy framework? Does it do anything to address your concerns?
No, it doesn't. For starters, this is a policy that was, I guess, redrafted, tweaked, and it only consulted with 31% of First Nations people and 38% of the Métis locals. What I'm concerned about is how many of that percentage were land users of the land. So that's one piece. The other piece is that they've tweaked it. All they've done is tweaked it. The matrix from the matrix system has now been changed to the assessment chart, which has 3 levels. But the problem is that they're still doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So what we've heard over and over again from nations is that registered letters are not consultation. So the first start of their assessment tool is registered letters. That hasn't changed. Over and over again, we've heard about nations, First Nation Métis people talking about cumulative impacts. That has not been addressed. In fact, this government doubled down on saying that we will not address past cumulative impacts. We'll only look at those going forward. But in the past, those are the cumulative impacts to our traditional territories they haven't listened to that. So that's always been an issue with First Nation Métis people in Saskatchewan, the cumulative impacts, and this government has chosen not to look at that. The other thing that has been reinforced here in this new revised policy is we used to have access to leased lands to exercise our treaty rights, to hunt, fish, gather, pick medicines. The Trespass Act is now enforced, so we won't have access to leased lands. And leases are still up to 33 years. So for 33 years on leased land, we will not have access to that. So it hasn't changed. And also the other thing that's consistent is that this policy is still government driven. It's not community driven. The government still says what treaty rights are going to be impacted, if any treaty rights are going to be impacted, and they all can decide, the government decides if the land is being used traditionally. So it's going to be creating more barriers for the traditional users of the land, because at the end of the day, it's the government that decides if duty to consult will be triggered and what treaty rights are going to be impacted, and they decide if they're going to be impacted and what is, and the government decides whether they accept the Indigenous folks that use those lands as traditional use. The government decides. It's not community driven. This is very much still government driven.
Well, Betty, I want to go back to the consultation aspect. The Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations in Saskatchewan rejects the government's claim there was broad consultation with First Nations in coming up with this new policy framework. So what's it going to take for you and the leaders of First Nations organizations to accept a new policy framework with the province of Saskatchewan?
Well, for starters, at the First Nation perspective, 31% of First Nations were consulted. So that's pretty low. So yes, I concur with FSIN saying that this is not consultation. This is not, and they've rejected it. And this shows how this government has failed to consult on their duty to consult policy. and they've done, and this is their MO. They do it all the time, where they don't consult, where Indigenous people are an afterthought. And 31% that were consulted in First Nation communities, that's a dismal failure. And that's not looking at the Métis local. The Métis local is only 38%. Those are dismal numbers. So in terms of consultation, no, it hasn't happened. And consultation, when governments say they value relationships with First Nation Métis communities, and when they only do a phone call the day before they announce it, that shows their utter disrespect for the relationship.
Mm-hmm. And the changes come into effect in 2024. Here we are in August of 2023. Can anything be done before the new policy becomes law in Saskatchewan?
Well, there are First Nations that have filed lawsuits against the provincial government. The advocating that First Nations and Métis communities have done, including myself, around halting the sale of Crown lands. So that has been good. The thing here is the government have said they'll halt any sale of Crown lands and leases for 2 years. However, my question to the government is, they've already sent notices of leases and Crown lands that they're going to be selling in this fiscal year. My question to the government is, will they retract those upcoming sales and leases for this fiscal year?
Well, Betty, there's certainly plenty to think about when it comes to this, but we'll have to leave it there. We certainly appreciate your time, and I want to say miigwech to you for taking some time for us.
Yeah, miigwech for having me, and it's always a pleasure to chat with APTN. Thank you.